Lucrezia Borgia, who was she really? The immoral daughter of a corrupt pope? Her brother's lover? Or a woman wrongly accused by history? Did the series The Borgias show us the real Lucrezia? Or just another dramatic fantasy? In this video, we'll separate historical fact from scandalous fiction. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. But before we start analysing the series, let's take a moment to get to know our main character, Lucrezia Borgia. And let's briefly peek behind the high walls of Renaissance Rome into the world of the papal court, where most of the events in this story will unfold. If you already know all about her background, feel free to skip ahead to the next timecode. Lucrezia Borgia was the third child of the Spanish Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, who would later become Pope Alexander VI, and his favourite mistress, Venosa de Catane. When Lucrezia was born in 1480, her father consulted an astrologer who predicted a brilliant future for her. And indeed, her life would be full of dramatic twists and turns. Now, a careful listener might ask, wait, how could a cardinal, or even a pope, have children? Weren't they supposed to take a vow of celibacy? In theory, yes, but in practice, things were very different. Even today, historians argue about how many children this pope actually had. And if you think the problem was just Alexander himself, you'd be mistaken. The Catholic Church of that time could hardly be called virtuous. To put things in perspective, we are only about 40 years away from Martin Luther's famous theses and the rise of Protestant ideas across Europe. Meanwhile, Rome was a city full of corruption, nepotism, and moral decay. But for now, young Lucrezia was far from all that. She was raised in the household of her cousin, Adriana Orsini, where she studied Latin, Greek, Italian, and French, as well as art, music, politics, philosophy, and logic. That is, until 1492, when her father ascended the papal throne. From that moment on, she became one of the most important pieces in his political chess game. And this is where the series begins. I suggest we start with something positive. Psychologists say that before offering criticism, it's good to mention the positives first. So let's do just that. Let's start with fact number 1. Lucrezia was visually depicted with remarkable accuracy in this series. Actress Holliday Grainger brought her to life with striking grace, and the costume designers did an exquisite job. What we saw on screen was the golden-haired beauty, just as her contemporaries described her. The truth is, we rely mostly on written accounts because only one confirmed portrait of Lucrezia exists, the portrait of a youth, possibly painted by Dosso Dossi about a year before her death. In it, she appears to be around 38 years old. Here's how the Duke of Ferrara's ambassador to Rome described her at the age of 13. An exquisite, graceful, young thing whose education had been full of Christian piety. And here's a description from her early 20s, written by a courtier. Of middle height and graceful of form. Her face is rather long, as is her nose, her hair golden, her eyes of no particular colour, her mouth is rather large, the teeth brilliantly white, the bust admirably proportioned. Her whole being exudes gaiety and humour. But above all, Lucrezia's greatest pride was her hair, long, golden, and luxurious. It was considered the ideal of beauty at the time. A lock of her hair is still preserved today. Let me know in the comments, did your idea of Lucrezia match the way she was portrayed on screen? It's no surprise that a beauty like Lucrezia, and the daughter of the Pope, no less, was seen by the Borgia family as a valuable political asset. At just 13, she was married off to Giovanni Sforza. And with that marriage, we arrive at fake number 1 in the series. In the show, Giovanni Sforza is portrayed as a man in his 40s, but in reality, he was only 25 at the time of the marriage. And honestly, I can't help it. This actor reminds me so much of Lord Farquaad from Shrek. I couldn't stop laughing while watching, because that's all I could see. But let's get back to the serious part. The real historical inaccuracy in the show isn't about the marriage itself, but about how it ended. the series shows Giovanni as a cruel and abusive husband who mistreats Lucrezia. Later, after a humiliating divorce, he is declared impotent and forced to sleep with prostitutes to prove his manhood. He fails and is publicly shamed. But what really happened? In truth, Giovanni Sforza was not impotent, just in case you were losing sleep over that. Before and after his marriage to Lucrezia, he fathered children with other women. Since Giovanni refused to cooperate, Pope Alexander VI sent him a letter, suggesting that he publicly prove his masculinity. Naturally, Giovanni wasn't ready for such a turn of events. He chose instead to accept the bride's dowry as compensation. And it was no small sum. 10,000 ducats, which today would be worth around 2 million euros. In return, he agreed to the humiliating claim that the marriage had never been consummated. But his wounded pride and injured ego pushed him to strike back. He accused Lucrezia and her entire family of inappropriate relations, suggesting that the Pope wanted to keep for himself what he does not want to give to another. And so began the scandalous rumour of incest, a story that stuck to Lucrezia and the Borgias for centuries. And yes, the series chose to follow that version too. Which brings us to fake number 2. Throughout season 1, we see an uncomfortable level of affection between the siblings. And by season 3, the show takes it even further, with fully explicit scenes between Lucrezia and her brother Cesare. I don't know about you, but personally I found it incredibly disturbing to watch. It felt like Cersei and Jaime Lannister all over again, except those two were fictional. This, however, is meant to be based on real people. In reality, there is no historical evidence to support such a relationship. No letters, no reports from ambassadors, no chronicles from contemporaries, only the slander spread by her former husband, which was eagerly picked up by the Pope's many enemies. From what we do know, Lucrezia and Cesare were indeed close as siblings. And Cesare, who is a highly complex historical figure, just as the series portrayed him, was very much involved in shaping his sister's fate, along with their father. But the showrunners chose to push the drama to the extreme. Now, let's turn to something the series actually portrayed correctly. Lucrezia may have had an illegitimate child, and she might already have been pregnant during the annulment process. In June 1497, Lucrezia withdrew to a convent for several months. Then, suddenly, a mysterious baby appeared in the Borgia household. The boy was named Giovanni, and became known as the Roman infant, and around him a full-blown scandal erupted. At first, the Pope issued a papal bull declaring that the child was Cesare's son from an unknown woman. Later, he issued another statement claiming that he himself was the father, also by an unnamed Roman woman. Now, of course, I wasn't there holding a candle by Lucrezia's bedside, but many historians believe that Lucrezia may have had a romantic connection with one of Alexander's chamberlains, Pedro Calderón. His body was later found on the banks of the Tiber River. In the series, the blame for Pedro's death is placed on Lucrezia's brother, Juan. She is shown hating him for this, and even wanting revenge. But in fact, Juan had nothing to do with it. He was mysteriously killed in Rome, while Lucrezia was still staying in the convent. So let's call that fake number 4. And what do you think? Whose child was it really? Naturally, such a valuable bride, and don't forget, officially still a virgin, didn't remain unmarried for long. In July 1498, Lucrezia was married to Alfonso, Duke of Bisceglie, an illegitimate son of the King of Naples, who was slightly younger than her. It was a political marriage, but she found love. Their relationship was truly happy, though unfortunately short-lived. In the series, Lucrezia poisons her husband with her own hands after he is mortally wounded by her brother. But in reality, the story was far more dramatic, and it's unclear why the writers felt the need to rewrite it. So let's call that fake number 3. Just like with her first husband, at some point Alexander VI realised that an alliance with Naples was no longer politically useful. Alfonso sensed the shift in atmosphere and briefly fled Rome. Lucrezia, who was pregnant at the time, begged him in her letters to come back, and he did. On November 1st, 1499, she gave birth to their son, Rodrigo. a child completely ignored by the series. For a moment, it seemed like their family life was back on track. But in July 1500, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. His guards managed to fight off the attackers, but he was still seriously wounded. Lucrezia personally cared for him during his recovery, while rumours spread that her brother had organised the attack. Then, just as Alfonso was starting to heal, one day while he was sitting and talking with his wife and sister, the doors suddenly burst open. A group of armed men entered, led by the infamous Micheletto da Corella, Cesare's most loyal friend and most feared killer. Lucrezia demanded to know what was happening. Micheletto simply told her she should ask the Pope. Panicked, she ran to Alexander, who claimed he had no idea what they were talking about. But when they returned to the room, they found guards posted at the door, refusing to let them in. Moments later, they were told that Alfonso was dead. He had been strangled, with the official explanation being that he had attacked Cesare with a crossbow in the garden. So no, there was no dramatic jealousy scene. Cesare did not kill him with his own hands, and Lucrezia certainly didn't poison him, as the series would have us believe. By the way, since the show was never renewed, we never got to see what happened next, but Lucrezia's story didn't end there, and in fact the show ends up blurring the lines between her second marriage and her third, mixing facts and fiction once again. That's why I feel it's only right to tell you how her story truly ended. After Alfonso's death, Lucrezia fell into deep mourning. She withdrew to the town of Nepi north of Rome and began signing her letters to her father and brother as La Infelicissima, the most unhappy one. But neither man paid much attention to the 20-year-old widow. Very soon, they began searching for a third husband for her, one who would once again serve the family's political interests. When the series shows her second marriage to Alfonso and her supposed arrival in Naples, it claims that she had to leave her child behind because her husband's family refused to accept him. This is fake number 5. First of all, Lucrezia never lived in Naples with her second husband. At that time, she had already received an appointment as governor of Spoleto, which was a shocking decision at the time, since such positions were usually reserved for cardinals. In reality, all of this took place during her third marriage to Alfonso I d'Este, the future Duke of Ferrara. Now, Alfonso's father refused to accept little Rodrigo, Lucrezia's son from her second marriage, and so she left the boy behind and never saw him again. But despite that painful beginning, it seems the rest of the court was kind to her. And in Ferrara, Lucrezia finally found happiness. She gave birth to 8 children, 4 of whom survived into adulthood. Together with her husband, she worked to bring artists and intellectuals to court, and became an active patron of the arts. It also seems they allowed each other occasional lovers, as suggested by Lucrezia's flirtatious letters to her brother-in-law, and to the poet Pietro Bembo. Lord Byron once called those letters the most beautiful in the world. During her husband's military campaigns, Lucrezia often ruled Ferrara in his place, and by all accounts, she did so brilliantly. When her father and brother died, the Borgia family lost nearly all of its power, and Lucrezia, once the most influential woman in Italy, became just another noblewoman. But by then, she was already a deeply respected duchess. The papal throne was now held by Julius II, a sworn enemy of the Borgias, who even refused to live in the sinful apartments of the previous pope. Lucrezia died at the age of 39, shortly after her 10th childbirth. The people of Ferrara mourned her deeply and remembered her warmly as La Buona Duchessa, the good duchess. The old rumours and scandals surrounding Lucrezia had already faded by the time she died, but her life was so fascinating that writers and artists kept returning to her story, reimagining her as a dangerous beauty and a mysterious poisoner. But in the end, Lucrezia's life is just one more story of a woman who, despite her intelligence and remarkable qualities, had no real choice but to serve her family's dynastic ambitions through marriage, and become a pawn in the hands of powerful men. Yet in truth, on this political chessboard, she was nothing less than a queen. Let me know in the comments. Did this series manage to capture who Lucrezia really was? Did it shed any new light on her life and personality? To me, it felt more like a retelling of Renaissance gossip. Beautifully styled, but still a collection of old rumours. Which fascinating woman from history should we talk about next? Leave your suggestions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.